The first snow of November came down in slow, drifting spirals over the outskirts of Salzburg, layering the rooftops and narrow stone lanes in a soft white hush. I watched it settle against the windshield as I sat in my idling van, the same white service van I'd driven for 12 years, while the lights from my father-in-law's vast chalet glowed warm and golden through the frosted windows. It was Thanksgiving, though nobody in Austria celebrated it except my wife's American family. To me, it had always been a day of awkward politeness, forced smiles, and the tightening knot in my stomach each time her father, George Whittaker, looked at me as though I were a stain on the polished wood floors of his imported Bavarian dining room. Inside the van, the heater exhaled with a soft rumble. I could almost imagine turning back, driving down the winding mountain road toward the small flat Charlotte and I shared, pretending none of this mattered. But Charlotte had asked me to try. One night, she whispered that morning, smoothing the collar of my shirt, her hands gentle yet trembling. "For me, please." So I stepped out, boots crunching through the thin snow, and walked toward the heavy carved oak door. Before I could knock, it swung open. George stood there in a charcoal cashmere sweater, a glass of Riesling in hand, his expression already soured, though I hadn't said a word. "You're late," he said in that clipped Connecticut accent that somehow had only sharpened during the 5 years he'd been living abroad. Everyone else arrived an hour ago. I glanced toward the driveway where expensive cars were lined. A Porsche, 2 Audis, 1 gleaming Jaguar. My van stood out like a bruised thumb. "Traffic was slow," I said evenly. He stepped aside just enough for me to pass. Traffic, right. The warmth of the foyer wrapped around me. Old maple flooring, a chandelier dripping with crystals, the faint scent of rosemary and roasting turkey drifting from the kitchen. Charlotte appeared almost immediately, sliding her hand into mine. Her blue eyes searched my face. "You made it," she whispered. Her mother, Amelia, floated in behind her with a polite smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Daniel." I returned the greeting, though my focus stayed on Charlotte's grounding squeeze around my fingers. She was my anchor in this house that so clearly wanted me gone. And every year, despite everything, I came for her. Dinner began stiffly. The table stretched long and shining, surrounded by her siblings and their partners, most of whom had inherited their father's habit of small, condescending remarks disguised as humor. "Still fixing boilers and air conditioners, Daniel?" her brother Andrew asked, just minutes into the meal, twirling his wine glass. "Yes," I replied. "People enjoy heat in winter and cold in summer. Turns out it's useful work." Charlotte shot him a warning look, but her father was the one who spoke next. "No shame in honest work," George said, though his tone made clear he believed the opposite. "I simply wish my daughter had aimed higher." The room went silent, except for the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Charlotte stiffened beside me. "Dad," she said quietly, "we're not doing this tonight." But of course we were. The meal trudged on, weighted by subtle jabs and strained pleasantries. I pushed through each course, roasted chestnuts, cranberry compote, turkey carved in perfect slices, waiting for the moment when the tension snapped once and for all. It came when dessert was served. George raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he began. "To tradition, generosity, and prosperity." His eyes slid to me like knives. "And to hoping that in the years ahead we make choices that elevate us, rather than drag us downward." The fork fell from Charlotte's hand. It clattered loud against porcelain. "Enough," she said, voice trembling. "You don't get to talk about my husband that way." George's smile thinned. "Honey, I'm only saying what everyone else is thinking." "No," she snapped. "You're saying what you've always thought. That he isn't good enough for me because he doesn't have a degree from Yale or a job in finance or a pedigree you approve of." I touched her arm gently. "It's fine, Char." But it wasn't fine. I knew it. She knew it. And the entire room knew it. George slammed his hand on the table. "If he truly cared for you, he would at least try for a better life. You deserve stability, not a husband who spends his days crawling through attics and basements." The words hit deeper than I expected. Not because of what he said, I'd heard worse, but because Charlotte's face twisted with pain. "I love him," she whispered, "and he loves me." He pointed at me. "Then why is he dragging you into a life of struggle? Why should you two rent a cramped flat when I could help you? If he'd only swallow his pride. But no, he'd rather cling to his tools." He spat the word like it was filth. Heat flared through my chest. "With all due respect, I don't need your money, and we don't need your control." "You need discipline," he barked. "You need to understand that this family will not be weighed down by—" "Dad," Charlotte said, rising. "Stop." He rounded on me, face turning red. "Get out." The room froze. "Excuse me?" I asked quietly. "You heard me. I won't have my daughter disrespected by a man who can't offer her the life she deserves. This is my home, my table, and you are no longer welcome tonight." Charlotte gasped. "He's my husband." "He's an HVAC technician," George snapped. I stood, pushing back my chair. "You don't get to define my worth." "Oh, I already have." It was then, under the warm chandelier, with snow drifting past the window panes, that something inside me shifted. I saw clearly the rotten core of the Whittaker dynasty. Pride masquerading as generosity, wealth disguised as virtue, love conditioned on obedience. And I knew this wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It wasn't just about him kicking me out. It was about the years of belittlement, the subtle humiliations, the way he spoke to Charlotte like she was still a child. I walked out without touching dessert, without another word. Charlotte followed me to the foyer, tears forming in her eyes. "I'll come with you," she whispered. "No," I said, lifting a hand. "Stay tonight. Keep the peace. I need to clear my head." "Daniel." "I promise," I said softly. "I'm okay." But beneath my calm, something darker bloomed. And that was the beginning. 3 days later, I discovered the first secret. I was finishing a routine inspection of a commercial heating system downtown when my phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte. Asterisk, "We need to talk when you get home." When I returned to our flat, her face was pale. She handed me a folder of documents, bank statements, foundation reports, and photos of a house she had apparently inherited from her late grandmother in Tyrol. Except she hadn't inherited it. Her father had taken it. "He convinced me to transfer ownership when I was 19, she said, voice shaking. "He said it was for tax purposes. I trusted him." She swallowed hard. "Daniel, he sold it last year, without telling me." The pieces began to fall together. Her father's obsession with control, his condescension, his desperate need to assert power over every part of her life. "And there's more," she whispered. The foundation her grandmother started, an arts program for underprivileged kids, had been quietly dismantled. Funds diverted, property liquidated, all for profit. Charlotte looked at me with wet eyes. "He told me he was protecting the family legacy." I closed the folder slowly. Then it's time, I said, for a new legacy. That night, the blueprint of my revenge began to take shape. Not out of rage, but out of clarity. Revenge wasn't about destroying him outright. It was about unraveling him, piece by piece, the same way he had unraveled the people around him. It was about exposing what lay beneath the polished veneer. And it started with what I knew best: systems. Not just heating and cooling, people, networks, secrets, pressure points. By December, the first cracks began to show. I used my contacts, clients, vendors, local business owners, to trace George's recent real estate moves. After years of working in the homes and offices of Salzburg's wealthiest circles, I had built a quiet network of people who trusted me more than they trusted each other. One of them, an elderly property manager named Herr Beck, let slip that George was planning a major expansion of his investment firm in Vienna, using assets that didn't belong to him, including Charlotte's. I gathered documents, ledgers, emails forwarded anonymously from people who had suffered under George's manipulation. Small things at first: misallocated funds, aggressive acquisitions, quiet pressures placed on struggling families selling their homes. Nothing illegal enough to bring him down yet, but enough to build momentum. Meanwhile, I stayed silent, patient. Revenge is slow burn only when you know how to keep the flame steady. When Christmas arrived, the Whitaker chalet shimmered under a thick blanket of snow. Charlotte refused to spend the holidays there, and instead we spent quiet evenings by our small tree, drinking mulled wine and speaking in low, thoughtful tones about what came next. "I don't want to ruin him," she said one night as the fire crackled. "I just want him to stop controlling everything." "Sometimes," I said gently, "those are the same thing." She didn't argue. January brought the coldest winter Salzburg had seen in years, temperatures plunging into brutal negatives, freezing pipes across half the city. My workload skyrocketed, giving me easy access to dozens of corporate buildings and luxury apartments, including one belonging to George's business partner, a man named Victor Eisen. While repairing a malfunctioning heating unit in Victor's apartment, I overheard a heated phone call. Victor shouting about missing funds, hidden risks, and an impending audit that could expose everything. I left the apartment with more than fixed airflow. I left with leverage. February arrived with storms that battered the Alps and turned the mountain roads slick with ice. The world outside felt fragile and unpredictable. So did George's empire. My slow, methodical push had begun to unsettle him. Anonymously leaked documents sparked tension among his investors. A quiet tip sent the Tyrolean press digging. A series of Varnheimstories, accidental discoveries, exposed his misuse of foundation assets. And then came the article. Front page of a regional newspaper. Asterisk American investor implicated in asset manipulation. Not enough to destroy him, just enough to make him sweat. Charlotte read it, hands trembling. "You did this." I didn't deny it. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So is he," I replied. For the first time. The confrontation came in early March. George arrived at our flat without warning, pounding on the door with such force the hinges rattled. When I opened it, his face was blotched red, breath fogging in the cold. "You think you can humiliate me?" he snarled, stepping inside uninvited. "You think you can meddle in things you don't understand?" I stepped between him and Charlotte. "I understand plenty." "You're nothing," he hissed. "Nothing but a handyman with delusions." You stole from your daughter, I said evenly. You dismantled her grandmother's legacy for profit. You've built everything in your life on the backs of people you think are beneath you. He froze, just for a second. People freeze when truth hits bone. You don't know what you're talking about, he said weakly. I know exactly what I'm talking about. And so do your investors, and the press, and soon the authorities. His eyes widened. You wouldn't. You already taught me, I murmured, that a man must fight for the life he wants, for the people he loves. And you taught me that some men only understand consequences. He lunged, but Charlotte stepped forward. Stop, she said sharply. I'm done letting you bully him, or me. George's face crumpled, not in anger this time, but in something like fear. This isn't over, he whispered. It is, she replied. Unless you want everything to come out. Everything. He left without another word. By April, the thaw began. Snow melted into rushing streams down the mountain sides. The city's pastel buildings emerged from winter's shadow. Life resumed a new rhythm, and the Whitaker empire collapsed quietly. Not in flames, not in scandal, just in slow erosion. As investors withdrew, partners abandoned ship, and auditors circled closer. George sold the chalet, moved into a smaller flat, stopped hosting elaborate gatherings he couldn't afford. One evening, Charlotte received a brief message. I'm sorry, Dad asterisk. She stared at it for a long time before turning to me. What do we do now? She whispered. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders, resting my chin atop her head. We decide, I said softly, whether forgiveness is part of our legacy or his. She exhaled shakily. I don't know if I'm ready. You don't have to be. Outside our window, the last of the winter snow melted into the cobblestones, leaving the earth dark and ready for whatever came next. Revenge had never been my goal. Not truly. My goal was reclamation of her voice, her freedom, our dignity. And as spring sunlight filtered through the glass, warming our small home, I knew we had reclaimed far more than that. We had reclaimed ourselves.